Thank you very much, especially to the Department of Education for Norway for inviting me all the way here. I'm very pleased to be with you, albeit jet-lagged quite a bit, but thank you all for waking up with me. So, you know, I've spoken in the past the dangers of building buildings to last 100 years, and although they age gracefully over time, we run into some problems, and so we're not going to talk about that today. We're also not going to focus too much on why learning environments matter. There's plenty of resources online. I know this is, other speakers will speak to you about this. You can read up on this. So I'm actually here to tell you that we've invented a time machine. So if you'd like to see it, close your eyes. So some eyes are still open, so maybe not so curious. So close your eyes, everyone. Now open your eyes. It's 1985. So of course our American time machine has its limitations. So this is how far we get. So now this is school in 1985. Take a very careful look at the students, what they're doing. Look at their expressions, their faces. Now, let's use our time machine and come to the present day. So again, look at their expressions, their faces, their postures, what they're doing. So this raises a very important question. In the past 30 years, there has been much innovation, exponential innovation. Now think about 1985 to now. Right, we have the internet. We went from rotary phones to mobile phones to smartphones. Every field is advancing exponentially. So I ask about our schools, why have they not progressed? Why have our schools not advanced? Why is education and schools not keeping pace with the rest of the world? So to really understand why we have this problem, let's look at the design process. How do we build schools? How do we create schools? So by now, I think we all know that form follows function, right? That in good design, first you have a function, you understand what the function is, and then you design for that. And in fact, as the name of our conference suggests, that we know actually in our case with schools that form needs to follow learning. Yeah? Okay, so we know this. Let's see where this has gotten us. Yeah, this process. So really we have to first think about how do we define learning? So in 1985, in this scenario, when they came up with this space, when the architects, the educators worked together to create this space, the way they defined learning was lecturing, reading, testing. Yeah, so you get this space. It works for those purposes, let's say. Now, in the modern day, we have something that looks quite similar, hasn't changed much. So if we look at the design process, the way learning is often defined today by educators, by the global community of educators and architects, is often collaboration, student-centered, adaptive. Watch out. These are buzzwords. Right? What does this mean? What is collaboration? Collaboration to me could mean something very different than to collaboration, for another headmaster. Collaboration in Bergen could mean something very different than in Oslo, right? So we need to be very careful. We need to really think through how are we defining learning? See, because when we define it in this way, we get this. And this is not advanced. This is not progressing like everything around us. In fact, education is starting to look like this. And when education is done well, it does look like this. Let's just go back and forth here so you can see. Right? We're designing this, but I think most of us would say, you know what, we want our students, we want our children to have this type of experience. So, again, this process of going from learning to then designing the form, the spaces, what needs to happen is that we need higher resolution definitions of what learning is. We need to have more nuance in how we define what learning means to us. I mean, come on, we do this all day long. This is our lives. And we say things like, I want collaboration. I want it to be student-centered. Right? This is what we're passionate about. This is what we understand to our core. This is what we do for the world. We owe it to give it a bit more nuance, to really think about, what does it mean to me when I say collaboration? What type of collaboration? How often? Between whom? In what ways? Right? So I would argue that the way we currently think about this process is missing one piece, and it's purpose. See, in order to get a nuanced in learning of school here versus a school here, for these two schools to have a different definition, for them to have nuance in how they want their students to learn and their teachers to teach, they each need a purpose. Right? Purpose is what makes us unique, what makes us different. Purpose is answering this question, why do we exist? So once we understand why we exist as a school, what are we trying to do? Then we can better define learning. And once we've defined learning, then there's many ways to design for this. And I'm going to show you some examples, but just want to make sure that we're clear on this process, that when it comes time to designing the form, there's not one right answer. There's many right answers. And the world of architects is really good at creating forms. The problem is, collectively, educators and architects, we're not always getting the question right. We're not defining the problem right. So this is a big shift. Yeah? I think most of you came in here expecting, okay, let's look at some really cool forms, beautiful schools. Let's just take it home and build it. Done. School. Education. Kids, get in there. Right? So it's not that simple. Right? It requires a lot of thought. To design a space requires quite a bit of thought. And there are many ways to do it. So imagine the space that we're in right now. I'm presenting. Right? This is one layout. We could be in a 200-person circle if we wanted to be, right? I could be down here, right? I could be in the aisles. We could have an amphitheater. It could be quite different, right? The setup of our learning in this moment could be quite different, right? I could not have that. Maybe I have a picture book like we're teaching elementary, and I'm showing you the slides that way. But learning could happen quite differently. So there are many different ways, and I'll give you an example. So let's say we defined our learning. One of the ways that we wanted students to learn was meaningful mingling. You're wondering, what is this crazy American saying? What does this mean, meaningful mingling, right? Now imagine as a headmaster of your school, you said, you know what, I think it's quite important that my 9th grade students are mingling with 12th grade students. I think this intergenerational, different ages, I think they need to be chatting. I think there's something good that's going to come of this. Great. So we say meaningful mingling. You see how that's a bit more nuanced than just saying discussion, dialogue, collaboration. Right? It's meaningful and it's mingling. In a way, it's happening when you don't expect it. You're not sitting down to do it. Yeah? So the form could have many resolutions. Yeah? So if we wanted to do meaningful mingling between different age groups, we could say, you know what, our school will have a cafe. The kids will meet in the cafe, they'll run into their friends, they'll meet other people, they'll do their mingling there. We could say, you know what, not only will we have a cafe, we'll have color-coded seats. So 9th grade has blue chairs, 10th grade red chairs, 11th grade green, 12th grade yellow. And the 9th grade color will always be next to the 12th grade color, so they have to sit next to each other, so perhaps they'll talk. Right? So that's one way. You might say that the 12th grade classrooms are right next to the 9th grade classrooms. Yeah? So maybe when class lets out and they spill out, they run into each other in the hallways. You might say that the school, we will create a game room. Right? Maybe, for a 12th grader, it's not so cool to talk to a 9th grader, but that 9th grader is really good at chess, and he wants to compete against me, and we meet in the game room. I might spark a friendship over a game of chess because he's the best 9th grader there is. Yeah? So you can see there's 4 ways just to achieve meaningful mingling, and there's many more. So again, the form is not always the hard part. It's really defining learning. So to do this, I'm going to tell you a few stories. So here's story 1. Now, in 2013, New York City schools, they realized that of the Black and Latino boys that were graduating from high school, only 1 out of 10 was actually prepared for college and his career. 1 out of 10. So they realized that they have a big problem on their hands. So they started to design a new line of schools called Epic High Schools, and these schools would be centered around the needs of Black and Latino men because they wanted to stop this. These are actual Bing search results. Right? Their purpose was to eliminate this. Their purpose was to do better than 1 out of 10. Yeah? So they came up with this model of high school, and they told us, it's student-centered, it's this and that. And I said, look, we need a bit more. We really need to think about this. But in essence, they wanted students to really have workplace learning opportunities. They wanted them to be embedded in the community. They wanted early college exposure. They wanted these students to have a very different experience than typical New York City high school. So I pushed them further, and actually we came up with these 19 competencies. They wanted students to master these, and please don't strain your eyes trying to read this, but I'll at least highlight for you some of them so you can see that these competencies, this gives us a bit more nuanced, yeah? So now we understand that students should be able to evaluate spaces and shapes and conditions. We want students to be able to investigate scientifically, yeah? We want students to practice social responsibility, to conceptualize growth, synthesize systems and processes. And they went into, you can see the detail. They went into detail of what they really meant, what they wanted these young men to do from 9th through 12th grade. So we designed this for them. Now, this prototype space for their campuses, it was, of course, dealing with the typical constraints. They're co-located, meaning multiple schools in one building. We had to renovate old 1960s buildings. Couldn't change the structural grid, 28 feet by 28 feet. But you'll notice this doesn't look anything like a school from the 1960s or a school that's in a typical building. So we have a diversity of spaces in this school, and no teacher owns a single space. So that was a big departure from what's traditional in US schools and maybe schools around the world where one teacher is owning a single classroom. Now, in this school, teachers will actually travel with students around the campus to the space that's best for their learning in that moment. So if you need to do some scientific exploration You're coming to the lab. Now remember, one of the ways that they define learning was investigate scientifically to understand systems. You'll notice here in the back, we get into so much detail that we designed and created this plexiglass system that had overlaying plexi panels, so clear acrylic, so that if you wanted to teach students about systems in a very tactile way, as a teacher, you could say, today, class, we're going to learn about the different layers of the human body. Right? So each group will be responsible for one layer, the muscular system, the skeletal system, the organs, right? The nervous system. And we have to design this body so that when all of the layers come together, I know that the rib cage is protecting my heart and lungs. Right? It's a very tactile way. It's a tool in the classroom to help teach systems. With that same tool, we could teach about urban planning. The city is made up of systems. You have your infrastructure and utilities and subways. And then you have your street network. And you have houses and buildings and green spaces and public spaces. And so that level of detail of understanding this is what the school, this is how they define learning. Let's make sure they can teach in that way. Let's make sure they don't have a generic science lab or a generic science class, because to them, they need to learn about systems. In fact, in the back, you can see it's a periodic table of elements that the girl is standing at. These are clear boxes, and so students could bring household items and put it in the box for the element that it had in it. So you could bring a bar of soap, figure out which element was in soap, and stick it in there. So over the course of the semester, this entire periodic table fills up, the students build it up, and every time you come in, you learn something new, you understand something different. So it's getting to that level of detail and nuance. Now remember, one of their competencies was to communicate ideas. And so we created this space called the pit. And the entire purpose of the pit was to have discussions and debates. It's a very Socratic place, right? It's stripped of everything. The entire space is meant for interpersonal exchanges. It's all about me and you. We're sitting, we're in a group, we're chatting. That's all this space was designed for. And it does it exceptionally well. One of the other things they wanted students to learn was how to design solutions, how to conceptualize development, as well as practicing social responsibility. So what we did is we gave the school a business storefront. So we created a small off-campus location where the students could start a business in their high school. So in the early years, they planned for the business, and 11th and 12th grade, they launch and run a business. And the business had to be created with the community in mind. What are the local needs? So in this community in Brooklyn, they had a lot of people using bikes to commute to work, but a lot of bikes were breaking down, and so they realized a bike shop, repair shop, would be great for this community. So this is a space that's not even within the school, but it's a part of the school. Right, so you can see how this is quite different from your typical high school. I'm just showing you a couple of the spaces so you can see the difference and understand how we got from the purpose, which was we need to do better than 1 in 10 boys that are graduating are ready for college and their careers. We have all of these competencies that we want them to master. We've defined what that experience looks like, and so we get these beautiful spaces that are supporting what our teachers are trying to do. So, second story. Now, this is Columbine Elementary School in Denver, Colorado. So the school was built in 1947. It looks like your average school in the US. Perhaps, Siv's nodding, so your average school maybe even here. Now, this school had quite the purpose we met with them, and of course, in our typical process, we workshopped, and we understood that the school wanted to redefine what personalized learning looks like for elementary school kids. They wanted these children to be able to personalize, to make their own, to have agency, to control the way that they learn, because they were done with the days of a teacher saying, this is how you'll learn, and you, and you, and you will all learn the same way. Yeah. So, as part of that, they wanted to move to project-based learning. They wanted to make things a bit more hands-on. And so we wanted to understand, great, now how are we going to define this learning? If it's project-based learning, can we dive in a bit deeper? And so what we ended up doing, we designed the room for 2 moments in project-based learning. So show of hands, how many teachers do we have here? Teachers, educators? Okay, so the room's probably pretty familiar with project-based learning. You understand that, once a teacher's introducing the project, then the students will run off, analyze, research, they'll come together to discuss, and with their teams, they'll design something, maybe they'll make something, prototype something, and then they present the feedback loop, yeah. So we decided to design the space just to do these 2 things really well. That moment of discussion, where you're debating, you're communicating. It's a very egalitarian moment where everyone has a voice. There's conversation, you're exposed to the ideas of others, you're brainstorming together. So that's one moment. And then the other moment is at the end of the process, when you're really proud to show your work and you want to present and you need to communicate your ideas effectively. You need to engage in a conversation and dialogue, and you need to share. So, again, this was our room. And just a few weeks later, this was the room. So now, remember, this room was the place where students would come together to collaborate, but they wanted to go beyond that word. Remember, that's just the buzzword. So they wanted to teach students not just to collaborate, but to understand what role you play on a team. Hopefully that translates into the rest of their lives when they are in the workforce, with their families. They always understand, I have a role. And so we created this wall where when students walk in, there's 5 roles that the teachers have defined on a collaborative team. Right, so you could be, on Monday, you could be the facilitator. So you walk in and you grab your facilitation pad. It's got some notes and a few tips and guides on how to facilitate your group. Maybe on Tuesday you're the timekeeper, so you got your stopwatch. You're going to make sure, hey, no running over today. Right, on Wednesday, perhaps you're a reporter. So we have a big scroll, really celebrate. Right, you're going to scribe, you're going to take notes, and you're going to report back to the whole class. Hey, this is what my group did today. This is what we think. Right, and perhaps you're a note taker one day, and finally contributors. Right, we have cue cards for these young students, 3rd graders, 4th graders, to help them. If you're in the group and your role today is a contributor, here's some potential questions you can ask your group to make sure you're doing well. Right? One of the other things they wanted to do is exposure. In that moment of discussion and debate and ideation, it's not just about listening to one another, but it's listening to those from around the world. So we created this space called the Skype Mountain. Right? And on this mountain, students would get up there and they could Skype in any expert from around the world on the topic they wanted to learn more about, the topic they were discussing, they were having issues with. They were trying to solve this problem. Right? The Skype Mountain actually ends up being that they use it quite a bit for presentations as well. It serves as an amphitheater space. You can roll it out. And finally, when we do get to that moment of presentation, as a teacher, what you can do is have one student presenting and you call for a jury of their peers. So you can call 6 peers, 6 other students to sit on their jury. So we created a game, make it a bit more fun to sit on a jury. So this game, students will come and roll this giant dice, and whichever number you land on, you grab a prompt. And hopefully you can read these prompts. One of the prompts asks, something I learned from your presentation today was blank. Right, so as a third grader, if I'm asked to judge and give constructive feedback to one of my peers, if I have this prompt while he or she's presenting, it makes it a lot easier. Right? And the next time someone presents, I might ask, one suggestion to improve your presentation is blank, and I might give feedback that way. And you can see that this scaffold, right, this tool, this game that we created with them, over years of using this, it becomes second nature. The students learn not just how to present and discuss and have dialogue, but to give constructive feedback to your peers. So it's a bit more nuanced. It's a bit deeper. It's more in line with what the teachers at Columbine were looking for. So our third story starts off rather bleak. In the US, contrary to many parts of Europe, our system relies heavily on punishment for those that have made mistakes in their lives. So this idea that if someone commits a crime one time or someone has wrongdoings, that they are not rehabilitated, but rather they're punished. So our justice system leans in this direction. Now, we were working with the foundation, the Reset Foundation, and their entire mission was to break this cycle, to get away from this cycle where men were being sentenced to prison, men and women, but in their case, working with men, sentenced to prison for years at a time, just wasting away, not becoming better, but rather regressing. And in fact, there's a term in the US that's unfortunately quite popular called recidivism. So recidivism is when a prisoner is released, they complete their sentence, and within a couple of years, they end up back in prison. This happens quite often because, frankly, when you're in the prison, there's not much development going on. There's not much betterment. It's not a good place. So the Reset Foundation moved into this old warehouse space. This is what it looked like. And it was in this space that they wanted to do a few things. So what they do is they divert young men who are ages 18 to 24. They take them out of the prison system. They get approval from the judges for this. And they take these men in. And they live with them for 3 years. And they teach them. And they rehabilitate them. And their focus is on making sure that these men can reset their lives so that when they go back into their communities a few years later, they can positively contribute and not end right back up in prison. So it was in this space that, according to them, they wanted to cultivate healthy relationships. It was in this space that they wanted students to learn how to design their futures. It was in this space that they wanted students and these young men with troubled pasts to think about how they could contribute to their communities. It was in this space that they wanted to give these young men training and opportunities for work. And it was in this very space that they wanted students to have independence. And you'll pardon me, I've gotten in the habit of calling them students. But these are young men with pretty rough backgrounds, rough childhoods, and troubled pasts who are now students at Reset. So we took this space, and this is what we did to it. So the space has a combination of learning spaces, lounge spaces, living rooms, conference rooms, libraries. It has an interior garden. It's got a nice dining area. It's got places to meet with families and potential employers. So you can see, this is in the morning. They have a tradition called Harambe, where they get together in the morning and have a check-in with everyone, how they're feeling, how are they progressing, how are they advancing, what are their concerns, what are they going to work on and think together on. So you can see them doing this in the library. Now, as I flip through these images, I want you to keep in mind, in the back of your heads, this is an alternative to prison. Consider the contrast here. It's either a jail cell or this, right? We created this large map of the area for them in the lounge space. It's a magnetic map where the students and teachers, they can map out different phenomenons and needs in their community so that they can actually think about others outside of themselves. They can, again, this idea of taking care of one's community, being a positive contributor, they start teaching this quite early. You can see the level of independence that the students have here is unparalleled to prison. In fact, they're very big on relationships. Right? They have a lot of daily one-on-one mentoring and coaching. So we created these little houses, these rolling huts. So we have a few of these in there where they can have somewhat private conversations, can really focus on one another, feel that safety and security of a home, albeit symbolic and on wheels and open on both sides. But here you can see one of the students, he's actually having a job interview on campus. So this idea of bringing opportunity to the students. Right? This doesn't happen in prison. And it doesn't happen in just any abandoned warehouse. And it doesn't happen unless we're very clear about what is our purpose. How does learning look like? And in this case, part of learning was learning how to interview, how to put together a resume, right? How to develop the skills that you need to go into the workforce and get a job once you leave Reset. Last story. So we've made it. So the largest tech company in the world approached us. It's not our usual, Tuesday morning phone call. Them, along with the rest of Silicon Valley, realized that there's a big problem in tech. There's no diversity. Now, I just Googled a picture that would indicate that, but as soon as you type in tech company, this is what you see in all the images. So the challenge with the lack of diversity in tech is that the solutions that the tech world is coming up with only serves a certain segment of the population. And let's be realistic. Like, how many of us in the world, out of the 6 or 7 billion, need an app that can get wine delivered to your door? Of course, in Norway, everyone, yes, but the rest of the world, maybe not. So now, they wanted to bring some diversity into tech, and so they realized that they needed to start young. They needed to start in middle school and high school level. And in fact, they needed to, of course, target certain neighborhoods where there was diversity. There were minorities. Yeah. So we started working with them on a project in Northern California in the city of Oakland. And they specifically targeted this area because there was a lot of Black and Latino students. And interestingly enough, in those neighborhoods, it's not cool to be a scientist. It's not cool to work in tech. When you grow up in these neighborhoods, you want to be an athlete. Everyone's telling you it's cool to be a musician. And of course, we all love these two, but the chances are less than 1 in a million. So this tech company wanted to make it this cool to be in tech. It's quite a challenge. Make tech as cool as LeBron James and Jay-Z's big undertaking. The other thing that this company wanted to do, so our partner, they asked us, we want not just any kind of learning, we want to create a lab that will teach math, science, computer science, and technology, but we want a very constructivist approach to learning, very hands-on, maker approach to learning. If you know the MIT motto, the mind and hand, that they go together, that you can't separate the two. Learning happens best when you're thinking and doing. Yeah? So, not only did they want to inspire these minority students, have them feel like being a scientist and working in tech, or be a coder, inventor, engineer, that's as cool as being a musician and a ball player. They also wanted to push this constructivist learning, and finally, they wanted to teach the students a very important lesson, that it's okay to fail. It's quite a lesson. So I'll show you the space. Now, the concept that we came up for this space was called Computer Science Heroes. We wanted the space to give notoriety, to celebrate, to put up on the pedestal the same way we do our celebrities and musicians and athletes, to do the same for the scientists and the inventors and the engineers who have changed our world, who've had a profound impact on our lives. So you can see, wrapping throughout the entire space is this timeline, which covers the past, the present, and the future of technology and computer science. So this timeline is graphics, it's installations. It allows students to learn about the past and understand how that's affected modern-day tools and living, what problems were solved through technology in the past. It allows them to learn about the present-day tools and technologies and learn about them and use them. So 3D printers, laser cutters. And how do these impact our daily lives? And then finally, a space for the future, which is our way of saying that we put up displays for student learning, for students to project what they feel the future will be. Right? If these students are the future of computer science and technology, it's only right that we give them a place where they can hypothesize, speculate, and put the future up. So now you'll have to pardon me, the space is under construction, opening in 2 weeks. But I'll give you a quick tour just through our rendering. So you can see in the area here, it starts with the graphics of Guillermo Gonzalez, who helped create color television. And so it starts the past portion of our timeline. And just adjacent to it, you can see this is the future, where we have a display screen for student portfolios, digital portfolios. We have this area we call the iteration station, which I'll show you in a second, but essentially platforms where students can put different iterations of their work. Remember this idea that it's okay to fail, you have to show the students that it's okay to fail. You can't just say it. So we have these pedestals, and you can see the pedestals in the back here a bit more clearly. These 4 pedestals are meant for a single student to say, I was building a robot. Here's the first one. It didn't even stand up together. Here's the second one. It got a bit better. Here's the third one. It started moving a little. Here's the fourth one. It can speak. Right? But this idea that we're going to celebrate each of those attempts, all 4 of them, highlight them. We don't want to hide the rest. We don't want to just show the one that's moving and speaking. Right? So this idea that iterations are important, that they're going to happen. Again, throughout the space, you can see some of the graphics covering this timeline, this history. As you move into the lab space, it's very industrial. In fact, we wanted students, again, that constructivist mindset. You'll notice here that the ceiling's now exposed. Right? All of the guts of the building, the ductwork, how the lighting's hung, the water pipes, old markings from whatever the space was previously, how the concrete was built. They see all of that. Right? This might seem like not a very big deal that we took off the ceiling and left it exposed, but it's actually quite a big deal to a student. When you're sitting there in class and perhaps you're bored and you glance up and you see the ceiling and you say, wow, where's that pipe coming from? Ah, I see. Maybe it's coming from that corner and it's feeding air over there. Right? Maybe we have an AC unit over there. I see. And then we have lights, cables. Right? So that understanding of what's going on in the building. So again, pushing that constructivist mindset. And of course, you can see here we've got our tools, our 3D printers, our laser cutters. All of the materials here, the floor is now concrete. The walls are rougher. It's meant to be dinged up and banged up. In this space, you can really use and build things. So again, really understanding, it's not just teaching computer science and technology, but it's doing it with a constructivist mindset. Teaching kids it's okay to fail and have different attempts. So I'll bring us back to this. It's quite important that we remember this process, and I hope by now you can see that the form takes many different shapes and sizes. There's not one right answer to what makes a good learning space. But to set ourselves up for success, we do need to define what learning means to us in a very nuanced way. And in order to do that, we need to understand why our school, why my school in my town, in my neighborhood, why do I exist? And I'll leave you with this thought, that the best spaces for education actually serve this higher purpose, and they're also grounded in the clear vision for learning. Thank you very much.